You know that well-worn adage of not owning a boat, but finding a friend that does? Well, Portland Spirit has lots of ways to get you out on the river this summer, including jet boat excursions to the Columbia River Gorge, daily sunset dinner cruises, champagne brunch on Sundays, and their new happy hour cruises offered Monday through Saturday. Best yet, they have bathrooms on board, a luxury most friends' boats don't have, let's be honest. Celebrating 30 years as a locally owned and operated business, book a ride with Portland Spirit at portlandspirit.com. If you're looking for a place to recharge your battery and have the most summer fun, Salishan Coastal Lodge is your ideal destination. It's over 200 acres of every activity and vibe you could possibly want. There's golf, tennis, hiking, yoga, hot tub, spa treatments, and if you're only there for the zip line, they just added 2 more. Best of all, they have a daily yappy hour with refreshments for humans and pups alike. And CityCast Portland listeners get 20% off with the code CityCast in all caps. So go book your stay today at Salishan.com. When Dan Brophy, a popular teacher at the Oregon Culinary Institute, was found murdered in 2018, it became one of the most astounding true crime stories Oregon had seen in decades. Because the big twist was his wife, Nancy, was ultimately found guilty of his murder. But you see, Nancy was also a suspense romance novelist, and some of the details of the crime appeared almost forecasted in her fiction. So today on CityCast Portland, we're talking with Heidi Joy Trethewey, host of the new podcast Happily Never After, Dan and Nancy. Heidi, also a romance writer, knew Nancy through their shared love of writing. And we're talking with her about the ways fact and fiction blended together in this unexpected saga. It's Monday, July 8th. I'm Claudia Meza, and this is what Portland's talking about. Thank you so much for hanging out with us this morning. I ran through the whole series in like 2 days. It was really fun.
Oh, good.
I mean, it's not fun, but you know what I mean. It was engaging.
Well, I'm curious what surprised you, especially if you followed the case. What was
That's the
big
thing
surprise?
is I really didn't. I didn't.
Oh,
so
okay.
I knew like the spoiler.
Right.
I knew what was coming, but I didn't know the intricacies. I didn't know who this person was. I didn't know any of that. And then also like not quite understanding that like you were part of this world too. Like, yeah, this story begins with Daniel Brophy, a teacher at the Oregon Culinary Institute. And the one issue of sometimes I have with like true crime stories is that it does feel like the victim sometimes gets lost in this telling, and they're just this small part in like the darkness of the story, like, which is really weird, like human nature, that we find it exciting because it's like a roller coaster. Like we're not dying, but we get to hear about murder, you know? And it's kind of also just really sad for this person. Like this person existed, his family was devastated, he's gone. Like, could you give us a sense of who Daniel was, you know?
Yeah.
Before we talk about Nancy, I just want to know about Daniel.
Yeah, even though I did know Nancy, I never had the opportunity to meet Dan. But through this podcast, it gave me the opportunity to dig into who he was as a personality. So if you picture handlebar mustache, like kind of a gruff and very quiet demeanor, but this guy had such a rich and curious intellectual life. Like he was curious about organic gardening and raising edible flowers, and he kept more than 40 chickens, and he was obsessed with mushroom hunting and foraging. And then he'd like bring back those mushrooms and clean them with this perfect little mushroom brush. In the classroom, my understanding is he was very well loved, sometimes maybe a little bit feared because he could be very gruff. And so everything had to be precisely done, right? The bacon had to be the perfect level of crisp, or the carrots had to be diced exactly the right size. So I just really liked the fact that we painted a real portrait of Daniel and not just kind of left a victim as no more than a dead body.
Right. Well, let's talk about Nancy. Something that you did tell was their love story. Like, could you tell us a bit more, just for those who have not heard the series yet, just a little bit about how Dan and Nancy were together?
Well, they met after Nancy moved to Portland, and she enrolled in the Portland Culinary Institute. She was kind of looking for a new life, right, to restart her next chapter. And she fell in love with her culinary instructor, Dan. And he was married at the time, but gradually they got together. He divorced his wife, and then they married. And for 25 years, they were together. They moved to this house in the suburbs, and they seemed to really love each other. Everybody on the outside said, even though they were total opposites, right? She was as gregarious and silly and funny as he was kind of quiet and reserved and maybe introspective. But everyone said they seemed to work. And even one of her friends' dishes that they had sex every single night, even after decades into the marriage. And then she'd go back to writing, which that's commitment for you.
Yeah. Well, you got to know, I mean, this was the biggest twist in the series was fully piecing together that you were very close in proximity to Nancy, personally as a member of the Rose City Romance Writers.
Mm-hmm.
And you shared this interesting anecdote of her critiquing a cover for a book that you were just about to publish.
Yeah.
Like, what was your impression of her?
So my impression initially was just that she was the queen bee, right? She ruled the roost. She was the president of our writing organization. And I mean, like, she fed off of that leadership opportunity for her. As I got to know some of her friends better in the reporting and recording of this, I also better understood that she was part of this inner circle that I wasn't really aware of or part of in the Rose City Romance Writers, where for a couple of years before I joined, they had created a blog together, CJ and Publish, on which that infamous How to Murder Your Husband article was published. And she seemed to be very popular, very gregarious, and absolutely goofy. Like, her friends frequently described her as a goofball, as somebody who'd kind of show up and pull stunts like showing up in a chicken costume just to make her friends laugh. So she really gravitated toward the attention of it all.
Yeah. Well, how would you characterize her writing?
Ooh, this is a tough one. I mean, in terms of genre, she wrote romantic suspense. So as the love story is developing, like a good romantic suspense will have the clock ticking and the hearts beating in the background, right? A mystery is unfolding at the same time that the relationship is progressing. But one thing I noticed about Nancy's work in reading some of her stories in preparation for doing this podcast was that she did not use an editor at all, not a developmental editor to solve some of the more convoluted plot aspects, and certainly not a copy editor to solve issues of grammar and sentence structure. Maybe she couldn't afford editing, but she certainly didn't invest in editing even the way that she invested in buying gun parts. And so I'm not entirely surprised that she didn't get a lot of pickup from readers, because it really shows kind of a lack of respect for your readers if you, as an author, are not willing to fully edit your work and have other people edit your work.
Right. In the podcast, you detail how the police went about investigating this crime, how much they looked into it, not only just, the intricacies of just like, this is how we investigate a crime, but they really dove into Nancy's background as a romance writer. Do you think that complicated the investigation in any way? And you did mention the essay, How to Murder Your Husband. Could you explain to someone who's just like, what are they talking about?
Yeah. Well, okay, first about the investigation. I mean, the police fully admitted that initially they didn't really pay a lot of attention to Nancy's novels as evidence. But the assistant DA, Nicole Herman, actually read Nancy's novels as homework on her honeymoon to figure out if Nancy had written into her books anything that they might be able to then use for the investigation. And ultimately, they picked out certain things that they thought, oh, could this be a clue? Could Nancy have then repeated some of the things she wrote into her book? I don't think it necessarily complicated or undermined the investigation. I think it's all to the good of understanding what's going on in Nancy's mind. But you also asked me about this essay, How to Murder Your Husband, which was a blog post on the blog CJ Published that a bunch of people, like more than a dozen in the Rose City Romance Writers, would contribute to. And their idea was they would be able to write about their lives and pick up readers in that way. And so initially, even before How to Murder Your Husband was published, we heard that Nancy showed Dan that essay, and he thought it was funny, like just her dark humor at work. And her friends even commented on the blog posts like, I love your devious mind, right?
Mm-hmm.
They thought Nancy was just being kind of ornery and wicked, but certainly not forecasting a murder that could happen 7 years in advance. And when I look at it more as clickbait than a confession or an advance thought. Of course, now that the murder has happened, it takes on a much darker cast. But at the time, I don't think that any of us could have imagined that Nancy would then later actually murder her husband.
Right. Well, let's take a quick break here, and when we return, more with Heidi Joy Trethewey.
Hey, it's John from CityCast Portland. Let's face it, sometimes bad stuff happens. A serious injury, a catastrophic accident, even a wrongful death. It can really turn your world upside down. And when it does, you deserve unwavering support from a dedicated team. Yeah, you need a lawyer. D'Amour Law Group has over 30 years of experience protecting the rights of Oregonians. Their team of skilled attorneys, led by the renowned trial lawyer Tom D'Amour, will work tirelessly to make sure your voice is heard and your rights are protected. Here's what one of his clients said. Tom fights for his clients from the first day they meet him through the last day of trial. So if you need help holding those responsible for your injuries accountable, contact D'Amour Law Group at 503-222-6333 or visit d'amourlaw.com to schedule a free consultation. They're committed to fighting for the justice and compensation you deserve right here in Portland.
Want to know one of my favorite sounds? Here it is. That's the sound I hear when I'm learning Spanish with Babbel. And if you want to learn a new language this year, I guarantee it'll be one of your favorite sounds too. I'm David Plotz. I'm the CEO of CityCast, and I've been doing Babbel for a few weeks, and it's been so much fun. This week, I've been learning lots of food vocabulary and how to order in a restaurant. This is one of the things I love about Babbel, is that it's about learning the language so that you can use it. As Babbel says, it's designed by real people for real conversation. So it's all based on real life situations. And these restaurant lessons are awesome. When I went to Mexico City last year with my girlfriend, I was mute. But next time, I'm going to be ordering the sopes and las salsas picantes. Babbel has over 16 million subscriptions sold, plus all of Babbel's 14 award-winning language courses are backed by their 20-day money-back guarantee. Here's a special limited-time deal for CityCast listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for CityCast listeners at babbel.com/CityCast. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/CityCast. Spelled BABBEL.com/CityCast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Well, you're a writer just like Nancy.
Yeah.
Like, were there any parts of this story that made you just go like, damn, like, I don't think I could have even written that as a plot twist? If it weren't true, like, nobody would have believed me. Like, people would be like, no, that's just crazy. That would, plot points that you're just like, Nancy. No.
Yeah. If I had pitched this exact story to an editor as fiction, they would have shut me down right away as being, too cliche, too on the nose. Like, are you kidding me? Somebody writes How to Murder Your Husband and then actually gets arrested for that crime? That's stranger than fiction, right? That's not possible. So as a writer, it did seem like ridiculously coincidental. But I will add to that, we writers love our research. Many others that I know have shot all sorts of automatic weapons or weapons just to get a sense of what does the kick feel like? How do you go about doing it? Because you want to add that era of authenticity to your books.
Research. I mean, this is really deep research for Nancy, though.
Yeah.
So this podcast also includes excerpts from one of Nancy's books.
Yes, and it's voiced by actors. Those are the only passages in the whole podcast that are voiced by actors. Everything else is the real deal, a real interview with a real person who was part of this case or had knowledge of Nancy.
Yeah. Well, it was this effect, like, it presents the reported truth with fiction from Nancy's writing, and it mixed it up in the retelling of the story, where sometimes you as a listener would have to be like, wait, what's going on? And as a writer yourself, like, do you also feel like you're kind of always seeing echoes of your stories that you write in the real world and vice versa? Because it seemed like it was happening for Nancy.
Yeah, I think one of the big questions that we asked kind of from the get-go was Nancy confusing fiction with reality? And it is 100% true that when you write, I mean, you want to bring as much of reality to the table in fiction as you can. So writers are often encouraged to write what they know. And so you do see parallels between what Nancy wrote. I mean, so many of her books are about women who are married to bad men. They're in unhappy marriages. They shoot their husbands, get away with it, and then they ride off into the sunset with a hot ex-Navy SEAL and his chiseled abs, right? So it seems like she must have been entertaining these fantasies over and over again in the writing of her fiction.
That's really interesting. But Dan wasn't a bad guy. From all accounts, he was really, really patient.
Yeah.
And very selfless, from what is reported.
Yeah, Dan seems to be like a really supportive partner. It seemed like Nancy and Dan very much had the live and let live. And some of Nancy's friends have said, you know, does it bother you that Dan is doing X, Y, and Z, keeping 40 chickens who are deeply annoying? And Nancy would say, this is not a hill I want to die on, right? Like, if it makes Dan happy, it's fine. And so it seems like they kind of let each other do each other's respective interests. But when Nancy had this idea to potentially move to Portugal, become an expat, sell their home, and try to kind of move to that next stage in life, Dan didn't want to do that. Or his answer was simply to kind of work harder to get out of their financial dire straits, not to pick up and move and sell everything they own.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's spoiling things to say that Nancy was ultimately convicted, but it's just come out very recently that she's appealing her conviction. And part of the appeal comes back to that fictional essay that we were just talking about, How to Murder Your Husband. Could you explain what's happening with the appeal?
So there is a great story in the Oregonian by Zane Sparling, who did a lot of the reporting on this episode that really details this. It looks like Nancy has a new defense attorney, not the one who represented her at trial. And it looks like one of the key points is that even though the judge excluded that essay, How to Murder Your Husband, ruling it as needlessly prejudicial before the case was brought forward, toward the end of the prosecution's presentation, the DA asks, he says, Nancy, if there's one thing you know, is it that anyone is capable of murder? And that is a line lifted directly from the essay, How to Murder Your Husband. Mm-hmm. And she says, yes, and doubles down on her answer and goes on and on and on, which in retrospect may have not been a very good choice. Maybe a better answer would have been, no, of course, I am not capable of murder, right? But that, and then also the fact that the police were at Nancy's home immediately after the death notification on the day of the murder, they took a picture of her van that showed this characteristic gash in the side of it from some minor accident. So they were on her property by invitation, but they did not have a search warrant to take that picture. So those are 2 points that the defense attorney who is appealing the case is bringing up as, like, these are not properly presented evidence, and therefore she should have a new trial.
Oh, gotcha. So we just kind of heard, and this already happened, but that Sybil Shepherd starred in a TV movie about the case. Like, in our research, we're like, wait, what? And that came out earlier this year. How to Murder Your Husband, the Nancy Brophy story. I haven't seen it. Did someone play you in the movie?
Oh, no. Oh, no.
You know, writing person number 3 in a circle.
Definitely, I'm sure nobody played me in the movie because I came to this story as a background character, right? I knew Nancy as part of her group, but I was never part of her inner circle. So that was actually something really cool when I was coming to this story. I was never part of Team Guilty or Team Innocent. When you look at kind of the divisions among Nancy's friends, the friends who kind of came to the conclusion that she must be guilty, and the friends who are standing by her even today, who still believe that she's innocent. I got to tell you that movie, it will be 2 hours of your life you cannot get back.
Okay.
Maybe instead, watch Taking the Stand on A&E. I think it's season 2, episode 3, and you'll get a chance to see and hear from Nancy Brophy on the stand. And I think that is a very insightful piece where you get to learn more about what she said and kind of where she went wrong.
Okay, imagine that they make this movie again. Who would play you?
Oh, goodness. Oh, I love Drew Barrymore so very much.
Oh, okay.
So much so that I have a kid named Drew. And I think Drew Barrymore has the right amount of humor and kind of, like she's winking at the audience. She's like, pull up a chair. No, pull it a few inches closer because I'm about to tell you the real dish. Mm-hmm. And so I really would hope that when people listen to the podcast, they're hearing something that is a bit of the juicy gossip. This is unlike other podcasts in that we don't get gory. Instead, it's like, can you believe this? And then this happened. Can you believe they did this? And so it's a little bit more like, spilling the hot tea. And less like, NCIS.
Yeah. Well, it reminded me of Desperate Housewives in a way. I think it was the music. There was something about the music that felt like I was watching Desperate Housewives. Do you remember that TV series?
Ooh, yeah, I do. But I didn't make that connection.
Well, an added bonus for us listening to the podcast was learning that 2 of our favorite Oregonian reporters were involved in the production. Shane Dixon Kavanaugh and Zane Sparling are frequent contributors to our show. So when I heard Shane's voice or when I heard, Zane's name mentioned, I was just like, oh my God, that's so cool. That's like neither here nor there. But did you get to meet them at all?
I got to meet Zane. And I am a former crime journalist. I've actually covered murders. That was my first career out of college, was being a reporter. And I have so much respect for what they did and the interviews they were able to get, because even if you had followed all of their coverage and all of their reporting from the very beginning, from the point of the murder, what you would not have gotten is understanding what was going on in people's minds. You wouldn't have known what the investigators were thinking when they discovered the ghost gun or when they discovered the eBay receipt. And you wouldn't have known what the DA was thinking when he, heard one of Nancy's unbelievable answers. And then what was he going to do with it? So I loved that Zane and the Wondery team was able to really dig in and find out what were people really thinking.
Yeah. Well, who do you think is cooler, Shane or Zane?
Oh, I'm not going there. Are you kidding me? We're going to start a war. They are both cool. And I really loved Zane telling me about...
Okay, Zane.
Whoa now.
Oh, Zane Sparling. Okay.
I was going to say, I loved how Zane says there's this really amazing trick that you can do as a journalist to get people to talk to you. And it's ask. Just like, oh yes, give it to me. I love it.
Well, congratulations on the success of the podcast. You want to brag a little?
Oh yeah, we beat Joe Rogan and the New York Times in 1 week. It was so exciting.
It is really exciting, Heidi. That's
and
really
never
cool.
in my wildest dreams did I think that it would get to this level, but honestly, all credit goes to the amazing producers and sound designers who made it so pro, who made it so engaging, and who worked with me, because I'm a novice, right? I've been on podcasts before as a guest, but I'd never hosted and narrated a podcast before. But I am deeply grateful that they gave me the opportunity to tell this story and really be involved, almost as if I was a member of the jury and discovering it bit by bit.
It was absolutely perfect. And I would love to see a new TV movie about this case told through your perspective, led by Drew Barrymore. I think that'd be great.
She would be amazing, as always.
Well, thank you, Heidi, for your time. We appreciate it.
My pleasure. Nice to see you, Claudia.
Well, that's all for today here on CityCast Portland. Thanks so much for listening. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more from around the city. Until then, see you at Slim's.